Joining me live now is the Nationals leader, David Littleproud. Thanks for your time, David Littleproud. We heard from Tony Burke this morning, the Workplace Minister, on this program, and he confirmed that the government's already compromising on its IR bill in relation to whether a workplace would take industrial action or agree to multi-employer bargaining. There would need to be a majority per individual workplace as opposed to across multiple organisations. This is something the business community's been calling for. Do you welcome the fact that the government's showing a willingness to compromise?
Well, these are baby steps, Kieran, and what you got to understand is I went to the Job Summit to be constructive, but one of the most galling and frightening things that I heard there was from the CFMEU, who came out and basically let the cat out of the bag and said, this is our time. We expect payback. They helped the Labor Party get in, and they've already done that in helping the CFMEU by getting rid of the ABCC. And that's going to cost the Australian economy around $45 billion worth of extra costs. And that's not just in commercial property being built. That's also your resi units that someone might be wanting to buy off the plan. It's going to cost you more because the ABCC is going to be abolished, the policeman on the beat that's been able to keep the lawlessness away. But then when you look at this multi-employer piece, now while we understand and appreciate that it was for those businesses with 15 employees or more, this is payback. And what we've got to appreciate that if you have the ability for more strikes, it means not only does businesses have to recalibrate and employ less people, but it costs you more at the checkout. So this government needs to be open and transparent in this. And we've just said that we've lived by the principle that they actually set up in government last time they were there. They've said that we've deliberately held back wages for the last 10 years. Well, that actually means that they're culpable for that because we've used the independent umpire, the Fair Work Commission. The Fair Work Commission is the one that's been determining wages and speed because it has to take into account the economy. And if it doesn't take into account the economy and you give the rights to the unions over it, then you might get a sugar hit as an employee, but ultimately you're going to pay more either without a job or more at the checkout.
But you're seeing some progress already, like with the increase for the aged care workers. The government would argue that them making representations on those workers' behalf has had an impact. Shouldn't a government play a part in that and trying to push for an increase? No one would begrudge workers in that sector a pay rise, I wouldn't have thought.
No, and we don't begrudge it, and that's why the Fair Work Commission should be allowed to make those determinations without politics, without political influence, to be able to take in all the factors economically that not only here domestically but internationally that need to be taken into account to ensure that it is a sustainable increase, that it doesn't add to inflationary pressures, and we think that that's the best mechanism to allow those determinations to take place rather than giving more power to the unions and rights of vetoes and these types of things where the union movements are basically, this is about allowing them more into the workplace to increase the number of their members that they have. Now, I get the ideology, Labor's very much aligned to that, but ultimately in life, someone always has to pay. And that means that ultimately the Australian taxpayer will pay if you start playing around with this and take the pendulum too far one way. And that's why business has been concerned. And thank God they've finally shown some courage. I mean, at the Job Summit, some of them were cowering in corners and allowing and inviting the union movements into particularly small businesses. So it's important we get the balance right. I'm not against the unions. I'm actually wanting to see real wages increase, and that's not just in wages, that's also in inflationary pressures we have to tackle. We all want to see that, but we've got to get the balance right.
Sure.
And we've got to make sure we do this in a responsible way that's sustainable.
The climate talks have begun in Egypt. The Prime Minister has chosen not to attend. Joe Biden will, as will Rishi Sunak, the new British leader. Has Mr Albanese chosen the right course here by not attending, given the various pressures at home right now?
Yeah, I think he's done the right thing. He's going to have to go overseas for ASEAN talks and then the G20. So I think you've got to get the balance right. And I don't begrudge the Prime Minister going overseas. I'm quite open to that. It is important that he does represent us on the global stage. And any Prime Minister, for that matter, of political persuasion, it doesn't matter. I think we need to get the balance right. And I think the PM's made the right call. He's obviously made a commitment on our behalf of 43% by 2030. But unfortunately, I think what he needs to do is stay here and explain to Australians how we're going to get there and who pays for it. Because while it's great to stand on the world stage and make commitments, ultimately someone has to pay for it. And this is what I think we're starting to see now, is the wheels are falling off because the ideology doesn't match to the practical reality. And this is where people are feeling that. The $275 that he promised 97 times before the election's gone. You can forget about that. In fact, forget about the 275 less electricity bills. This thing's going to get out of control because of the reckless speed that they're moving at. Now, we signed up to net zero. We believe we can get there. We can get there with technology. Technology is the exciting thing that will get us there, but it's not a linear line to get there, and you should be responsible. And the real competitive advantage Australia has is the sovereignty of our resources. We're not like Europe. We don't have to worry about other countries providing resources to us to get to net zero. We can be smart and look at all the technology options in being able to achieve that. But unfortunately, some of those have been taken off the table, like carbon capture storage, which Chris Bowen detests and in fact proved that in the budget.
Should the coalition accept some accountability for the energy policy chaos, though, over the last decade that's helped drive up those prices right now?
No, wholesale prices pretty well until Vladimir Putin crossed the border were actually pretty stable in the measures that we put in place, because we took a technology agnostic approach to this, because you've got to appreciate that we can continue to use some of the traditional industries, particularly like gas, if you invest in carbon capture storage. And they ripped out $150 million worth of investment in carbon capture storage because renewables can't do it all. And that's not the Nationals' point of view. That's actually AEMO, our energy market operator, who tells us that you need firming. And that firming has to come from something you can switch on and off, and particularly gas. But why wouldn't you reduce the emissions of it? And what we're saying is, by the way that we've gone down, and renewables, we're all for renewables, and what we've been able to do is put them where transmission lines already are. But what Chris Bowen's doing and the pace that he wants to do it means that we've got to build new transmission lines, and $20 billion extra in transmission lines just in this budget means someone's got to pay. If you look at your own electricity bill now, half of it is already for the poles and wires. Julia Gillard gold-plated it. Chris Bowen and Anthony Albanese are going to platinum plate your transmission lines because of the reckless speed in which they're going. We've got all the resources. The licence to trade, the licence to operate internationally is to sign up to net zero by 2050. I'm sure that we'll get there. I actually think we can beat it if we invest in the right technologies and the new technologies, even the small-scale modular nuclear, that would take all our emissions away and firm up our renewables.
Very quickly, we're out of time, but do you support the government bidding to host the climate talks in 2026?
Oh, look, good luck to them, but I think there's more important issues for Australians at the moment, like their cost of living, not just on power and their mortgage and their grocery bill. And I think the government would be best placed to focus on that. But if they're going to go on the international stage, I think it's important that we herald what we have done as a nation in reducing emissions. But I think it's now time for us to also hold account countries like China in reducing their emissions, because unless they start reducing their emissions, all our efforts will mean 3/5 of bugger all.
David Littleproud, appreciate it as always. Thanks.
Thanks, mate.